Well, hello everyone. Today I'm speaking with Lalit Gunaratne, and he has quite an interesting life journey. So, hello.
Hi, Ruth. It's so nice to be with you here.
So, what I wanted to talk with you today about is a couple of things. The first one I wanted to start with is yourself as a multipreneur. So I can see that as the ability to see possibilities, which has to do a lot with creativity. Can you tell me about your approach to being a multipreneur?
Well, I guess it's a function of the fact that I'm cognitively, I would say, all over the map. I'm the
Mm.
least focused person on earth, and I've been like that since I was a kid. I get bored easily, so I flit from one thing to another. But every so often, I find something that's really interesting that I can stick to for a few years and get it off the ground if it's a business. And if it's especially if it's with some good people, because I always love to collaborate. So I'm just gonna take a swig of water here. So in that way, I think it's the way my brain is configured and how I was conditioned in my mind too. Because I grew up in Sri Lanka in a hill town called Kandy, where my parents were very open-minded. They were both teachers. My mother was a Montessori teacher. Um, so because there was no Montessori schools in Kandy at the time, she didn't send me to any kindergartens or nurseries because she thought it'll kill my creativity. So I remember there was a nursery school behind our house. I must have been 4 years old. I used to walk back there, and there were all these kids behind these windows, the bars in this school. I used to look from the other side of the bars at the kids, and they'd be looking at me, and then I kind of wander off, and there was a river, there were paddy fields there. So I'd be just sort of wandering around this village. It was a very safe place. Everybody knew each other, and that's the way I spent my days, catching ladybirds, trying to catch little fish, and just enjoying nature. So I think that freedom has kind of spoiled me not to focus on any one thing. So that's how I believe from that foundation that I've become what you describe as a multipreneur. That's the first time I heard that word. Great.
So, what does it take to see possibilities? Do you have a process that you use?
Well, it's not really a process. I think my mindfulness meditation practice, which I learned as a 12-year-old. I was taught that by a Buddhist monk, and my father meditated. So the meditation practice is about gaining space. As soon as I focus on my breath. Now, if I tell you, breathe and observe, breathe and say observe, take a deep breath and say observe to yourself. As soon as you do that, you gain a little bit of space, right? And as soon as you gain a little bit of space, you can see things a little differently, because most of us are stuck on the left side of the brain to get things done. And it's the side of the brain that is reactive, it's strategic, it can be manipulative, it's goal oriented and all of that too. So it's going after something, to achieve something, to perform something, looking for an outcome. So when we are stuck on the left side of the brain, especially with things that we have to do based on, say, a terms of reference or some sort of an order that somebody has given you some limitations, and you're going to go on that track, it's hard to find yourself looking outside that, because you need to get things done. So for me, as soon as I'm stuck on that side of the brain, when I take a deep breath and say observe, I stop my thought process, I stop the past and stop the future, and I have the ability to become present, to put things in perspective. Then I have the ability to look at things in a different way, outside the confines of that track that I was on the left side of the brain. So this is essentially, through this practice, I'm because I do it. So it's not something that you can do in a day. It's been a long-term practice for me. I've been a long term meditator. I meditated for a long time in terms of the practice, sitting down and focusing on my breath. So it's like learning to play the piano.
Mm.
You need to learn the scales before you can make music. So you know what C sounds like, F sharp sounds like. So then that consonance is what helps you to then to create new things. So for me, enabling myself to stop my thought process through this practice enables me to then think a little bit more creatively outside the box. So the meditation practice itself, now as I said, I learned it when as a 12-year-old, and I've been fascinated with the practice. I've inquired about it, learned about it, worked with the teachers over the years. And of course, there was a period of time where I didn't meditate on a regular basis when I was in my 30s and 40s, when living life on the edge as an entrepreneur, as a father of 4 children, trying to meet my commitments. So all of those challenges there. But I did one thing on a daily basis, which I've continued onwards. I still had a practice where I started the day with some exercise where breathing was involved. So that was my space every day, the anchor every day, because the rest of the day will go crazy. As an entrepreneur, as a business person, as somebody who's self-employed, there are no boundaries for the rest of the day. So that anchor was important. But when I turned 50, I decided I'm going to start meditating on a daily basis. And that has again, it has shifted my mind in a different way, because I always had the practice. I've always had the breath as my friend all along, but focusing on a daily practice has brought that awareness to a different level. The ability to stop myself and move myself away from the left brain to the right brain to become whole brain. I've been able to do that much better with the daily practice. So that's sort of the foundational way that I have been able to be more creative.
It's really interesting that you talk about the left brain and the right brain. According to the World Economic Forum, the top skills needed for the future are analytical skills, number 1, and number 2 are creativity skills. So how do you see that as a symbiotic relationship?
Absolutely. And they go hand in hand, because that's the left brain and the right brain. So I do teach a critical thinking and an analytical thinking course. And it is, yes, absolutely about understanding the process of things, to step back and look at something and analyze it. So we do bring our conditioning, our childhood conditioning, into our life, to our day-to-day life. So I grew up in this town of Kandy in the 1960s. So between 0 and 10 especially, we are hardwired with that conditioning, with the loved ones who looked after us, and we trusted them. So they gave us a certain set of values that has and ethics and rules that we live by, that we think are the right things to do. But they may also hamper us. They may also be partly conditioning us on a social basis, on an ethnic basis. So there are a whole bunch of things, economic basis, that may have given us a certain sense of arrogance, perhaps conceit, perhaps, of who I am, the identity that I carry. So when you think analytically and critically about something, you need to be able to understand that those biases, unconscious biases, may hamper my thinking process. So that's where getting to the right side of the brain becomes important, to really be able to put a mirror on myself and say to myself, what I learned as a part of society, and what was acceptable politically and what was politically correct or not in the 1960s, is that appropriate for 2023 in the important work that I'm doing? So I have to be humble in terms of constantly checking on what some of those narratives are that may be hampering my analytical and thinking process. Because if I don't go inward and check them out and contemplate and reflect on those things and see how they might impact on an important decision that I make, and if I am a leader of an organization, that decision is going to impact a lot of people. So if I don't think about it analytically and critically, but also do not bring the creative thought process into it, by getting to the right side of the brain to put a mirror on myself to see, okay, what am I afraid of? And then can I deal with that at a level where I bring it to a logical, rational place? And that's a process that, I know we don't have too much time today to go deep into this, but all I'm saying is that's that personal practice that I'm talking about. So I believe everybody who wants to be an effective leader has to do that inner work constantly, has to focus on themselves constantly, to question themselves, and to really look at things, analyze things, but also then be creative, because you need to be able to leave that left brain behind to think of the possibilities. Because from another thing that I really value is that, because I haven't really had many boundaries in my formative years, and I have been a renegade all throughout my life. I have taken, Robert Frost's poem, The Path Less Traveled in my
Yes.
life, which has made my life challenging too, because I don't have any financial security as a result. And I keep putting money and time and effort into all kinds of different projects and schemes that my wife Samantha, I have to give her, my life partner, I have to give her a prize for being with me through all the trials that I have sent her through, because I am out there. And for me, the creative thinking process is about finding unlikely ideas and bringing them together and seeing something beautiful evolving from that. And some of those things surprise people, and for me, when I quiet my mind, I can see 10 steps ahead. When I meet one person, I think, this person can, and what he or she is doing, or what they are doing, can go with what these people are doing.
Mm.
And how can I bring that together? But I have to manage that relationship, because these are unlikely people coming together who have never perhaps thought of how they could collaborate and do something new. And for me, it's a process fraught with a lot of storming. And my role is to manage that relationship and to show them a vision of what it can be if they can get off their egos and come to really play in an authentic way and find a new way. And I would say 75% of the time I fail. And the 25% of the time I win, we form some beautiful relationships as well. We do something that's totally novel and new to the world out there.
I'm glad you said that, because one of my favorite parts of talking about creativity is relationship creativity. It's about stretching the bounds of what your partnership can do.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But at the
Yes.
same time, you talk a lot about humility. So where do you see humility and creativity being also good partners?
Absolutely. If we are stuck on a certain track with certain sort of worldviews and agendas, we're not being humble. Then we are stuck on something. And then the arrogance comes from that, the hubris comes from that. And then it's hard to move me, because this is the way I've done it before, like this, and I'm going to keep doing it like this. It's hard to work with people like that. So you leave them alone, right? So if I can then encourage somebody to, well, actually, you got something beautiful going, but how about thinking along these lines? And if they're willing to be open, then we can work together to explore these avenues. And it takes a long time. And that's another thing too, because we have really got spoiled for instant gratification, getting things done fast. The creative process is not like that. It takes time for things to evolve. And unfortunately, our school system is more and more focusing our children to be single-minded in many things, and killing the creativity. And I have listened to people like Sir Ken Robinson, who asks the question: do schools kill creativity? I listened to a lecture given by him in the Toronto School Board, where they brought him in maybe 10 years ago, 8 years ago, to really work with teachers and the school system. I was so encouraged that the school board, the Ottawa school board rather, had brought Ken Robinson in because I had read his books before, and I think he's an amazing thinker for the world that we need out there. So the more we focus our kids to do one thing, coding is the best thing to do,
Mm.
we're going to have a population out there who's not going to be able to deal with the challenges that the universe is going to give us. It can be environmental issues, climate issues, it can be relationship issues, it can be social issues. We need creative thinking to get out of these things because, the definition of, what is it now? Definition of stupidity, is it?
Insanity, I think it is.
Insanity, that's right. Insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result, right? So that's what it is. So I'm glad that schools and organizations out there are promoting critical and analytical thinking alongside creativity, because that's the marriage that has to happen. So I'm also informed by the amazing work done by the Harvard neuroscience professor Jill Bolte Taylor. As I was doing all this work, when I discovered her, I thought, wow, this is my lifetime work, and she's out there as a neuroscientist putting the science into validating some of these things that I have learned through the ancient practice of meditation and mindfulness and an inquiry, personal inquiry. And her work, she's a person, I'm sure a lot of your listeners know, she did a TED talk called My Stroke of Insight. She had a stroke when she was 37 years old. And as a neuroscientist, she knew what was going on. So she has written a new book called Whole Brain Living now, making it really easy for us to understand. And she proposes this theory called, we have four processes in our brains on the left and the right side: thinking and emotional. And she also says that it is through the mindfulness practice where we quiet our mind that we are able to then manage these four processes rather than being stuck on autopilot on one side or the other.
Mm.
So now it's, for me, that's a beautiful way of also bringing the skeptics along to the critical thinking and the mindfulness process, and helping people to put a mirror on themselves, especially about their unconscious biases as they move forward, especially if they're leaders of organizations who make important decisions which affect the entire system. So it's also part. So I also come from the world of systems thinking, where, and I know you do too, from the
Yes.
quality point of view. And even people like Edward Demings talk about systems thinking in a holistic process, right? In the quality circles too. So because if you press something here, there's going to be a reaction somewhere else. So it's that cause and effect that we have to understand and realize in the way and especially the more power we have, the more words we utter, more people will get affected by it. So we have to be responsible for that process. So in terms of so there is also a responsibility in being creative too, because we cannot come up with all kinds of crazy ideas that doesn't make sense, that may be self-centered, that may end up hurting people too, because there's that aspect of it too in terms of the creative process. So that's where the balance between the left and the right brain comes, because you can, there's a check and balance that happens back and forth, and every successful individual, every successful organization, every successful government all has a check and balance system, where the human psyche is such that sometimes we tend to indulge and power corrupts and all of that. We tend to then take control and try to run with things because we think that we know it all. That hubris comes up. So it's important to have that check and balance. For me, that internal check and balance comes through that meditation practice, because when I come up with some of these bright ideas, I think, okay, hang on a minute. Let me just spend a little bit of time reflecting on whether this would be good for me, good for the others, good for this earth. And then that reflection, you put some thoughts down, and then how can we move forward? So that's the way I approach it.
So I've been struggling myself a little bit with creativity. Is is it the small moments or the big bang or some combination?
I think it's everything, right?
Mm.
So one of the things that I have never done in my life, and this surprises many people, is that I never ever have set goals for myself,
Ah,
right? So
ah,
I do see, as I said, I do see things out there, and it's in combination, in collaboration with somebody, like the solar business that we started in Sri Lanka. It
mhm.
didn't happen with a grand plan, right? We put ourselves in a position where we were brought this. It was as if the universe brought it to us, this idea.
Ah, okay.
But that was only possible because I wanted to study engineering, and I did. And I ended up going to Seneca College and doing an engineering technology program, the nuclear option, back in the 1980s, without a grand plan,
Ah,
right? But I then, again, if I go back further, I messed up my high school a little bit because I was part of the high school rugby team. We won the Ontario Championship, ended up going to England and Wales. For me, that was way more important than going to school. When I came back to high school at Victoria Park High School in Toronto, it was a great letdown. So I ended up not going to any more classes. So I failed my grade 13 miserably, to my parents' chagrin, and I didn't know what I was going to do. And my cousin said, "Hey man, we're going to through Europe to Sri Lanka. You want to join?" I said, "I'm on." So again, I that was the best thing I did, without sitting there slogging away trying to get this thing done because my parents wanted it to, in a way. Now they were a bit worried about me, not that they were hampering me, thinking that I'm throwing away my future, kind of thing. And Canada is not an easy place to kind of, you don't have the kind of safety nets that we had in Sri Lanka, in terms of a community and the village to look after you when things messed up, right? So
mhm.
you're very much on your own. So those are reasons why my parents were worried for me. So the fact that I went on that trip for 6 months, we partied, we had a ball, we did crazy things. I shaved my head bald, tried new things, went
Mhm.
outside the comfort zone of myself in many, many different situations. So you learn more and more about yourself. I came back in the summer and I thought, no, I made my own decision. I got to do something about it. What's the easiest and the best thing to do? We live near Seneca College. I went to Seneca College, and I still wanted to do engineering because I was interested in things, getting how do you make things, and ended up signing up for the nuclear option purely because the nuclear option was a program done with Ontario Hydro, which paid more money. That was my sole decision to join it. And in the program, I realized that, I'm not really cut out to be an engineer. I'm a people person. I love the design part of engineering, but the kind of job that I might end up doing, I won't have probably room to be very creative. So I went to night school at the same time. I did two courses like tourism. I want to learn economics. Want to learn accounting. I did a real estate course. So really, my friends thought I was nuts, doing all these things. So that's that kind of not being happy with one little thing coming out. So all of these things opened my horizons again. And at the end of graduation, when Ontario Hydro was ready to hire us, I I opted out because my cousin and I thought, you know what, before we get the job, then the normal thing, maybe perhaps a family, a house, and a mortgage, and in the suburbs, which we saw happening around us. We thought, let's go and see the world first. And we were inspired by a book called The Drifters by James Michener. A bunch of young people who buy a Volkswagen pop top and get together. This book was set in the 1960s, and they kind of their way through Europe, running with the bulls in Pamplona and driving through the Mediterranean to Portugal, Sagres. So my cousin and I thought we'll do some jobs, earn some money, and we took a flight to London. We bought a Volkswagen Caravan. Again, our parents were thinking, what are you doing? So we'll be back in 3 months, right? We were going out there. There's a huge world out there to explore. Why limit myself? And my cousin and I thought, after graduating, we have a lifetime. And we did have a bit of a safety net, right? It's not as if we were jumping off the deep end. We had a home to come back to if everything messed up. So that's the kind of mindset that I'm talking about. That enabled us. Then we ended up having the most incredible time following the path of the book. I mean, I have to write a book about that, along the lines of James Michener, and all of those people, places, some of the places that he described. He ran with the bulls, did all of that in Pamplona. All those experiences along the Mediterranean, couldn't get across because Iran-Iraq war had started. Ended up going to Sri Lanka because we had visas to go to Australia. So we were working our way slowly to Australia. In Sri Lanka, somebody came up with an idea of a solar-powered water pump. Now, would that have happened if we didn't show up in Sri Lanka at the time? And one thing led to another, and we ended up establishing a pioneering solar business. At a time, solar was not heard anywhere around the world, setting up a factory, raising $900,000 as 25, 26-year-olds, 27-year-olds. Because we didn't take no for an answer. We were thinking creatively. We found that 80% of the rural homes in the country didn't have electricity. Here's a solution. Because when we went to the rural areas, a mother would bring a child and say, blow your nose, and black soot would come through their nose. And they would say, look, we need some solution to get away from this kerosene lamp that's killing us in more ways than one. And we found that this is a solution. We also found that in rural areas of the country, people could afford to buy this because there were affluent people in rural areas with permanent homes, with permanent roofs and all that too. So we saw a market there. The bankers didn't see that. The banking system is urban centered, even in Sri Lanka. Until we put the bankers in a bus and took them to the village and showed them the village. And 80% of the country's population is in the rural areas, even though it's socially depressed because, there's not much money made there. Because the farmers make the least amount of money. It's the middlemen and people who make the money, right? And we then created this business, which we are now credited as being pioneers in establishing the business globally, and also kind of stories written about that whole exercise too. So that for me, that whole initial entrepreneurial journey experience informed me and confirmed to me that creativity is the most important thing. To be out there, be open-minded, be open to possibilities. And to do that, for me, that's why I really enjoy having conversations with people, right? So I'm just going to finish with one thing. Whenever the kids used to come home, I used to ask them two questions. Did you learn anything new today? Did you meet anybody new today? Right? They would get mad at me for me asking the new, but Dad, we're just going to school. We're meeting the same people. How can we meet somebody new? I said, kept on asking, so learn something new. They always told me, yes, you know what? Yeah, this is something new I learned. I said, great. Think about it. Reflect on it. Right? So for me too, I just thrive in meeting new people because I see possibilities of some sort of a relationship with them if I can find common ground.
That is a wonderful way to end our conversation. Some of the best conversations are when I can just put in a spiking conversation and it just happens. So thank you so much. What you've done today is shown that it's so important to be open to what the universe is telling you, not only open to new thoughts, but open to new people and new ways of being. So thank you so much, Lalit, for speaking with me today.
It is my pleasure. Thank you so much, Ruth, for inviting me to spend the time here today. All the very best to you.
Yeah. Until next time.
Until next time. Yes, absolutely.